Hi guys, welcome to another episode of Small Steps to Freedom. If you're new here, welcome to Small Steps to Freedom. We talk about all things personal finance, from saving, investing, insurance, debt, credit, everything. So be sure to hit the subscribe button for all that content. On this episode, we'll be talking about fund fact sheets. So what are fund fact sheets and what information should you be looking at for when you are looking at a fund fact sheet? So that's what we'll be discussing on today's episode. So before you make any type of investment, you want to make sure you understand exactly what you're investing in and how it's going to be making you money in the short or in the long term. So this is where your fund fact sheet comes in. These come with, for example, if you want to invest in an ETF, it will have a fund fact sheet breaking down that ETF, giving you information such as what that ETF is invested in, the industries, companies, as well as historical performance data, for example. For the purposes of this video, we'll be looking at the Citrix S&P 500 fund fact sheet. And before we actually look at it, I just want to clarify.
I'm not a financial advisor, so if you're looking for financial advice, be sure to speak to a professional who's registered with the FSCA.
But I'll be talking about the general information that's important for you to kind of know when you're looking at your fund fact sheet before you make any decisions. So I'm going to be looking at it on my phone right here, so I might look down at some points, but I am still with you. You'll see the very first thing says investment objective. This is where they will give you information such as what that investment objective actually is. And as you can see with this ETF, the objective is to match the performance of the S&P 500 index. And the S&P 500 index, as you know, contains the top performing 500 companies of the United States. So what that tells you then is that that investment is invested in international equities. So it's not invested in South Africa. But it has information on the fees as well as the category of that investment. For this one, it's an ETF, so it's an exchange traded fund. And the one piece of fees that you really should keep in mind and should know when you're looking at your fund fact sheet is the total expense ratio. So the total expense ratio essentially encompasses every single expense associated with owning that fund or that investment. So that is the total amount that you'll be charged for owning that investment. In this case, the total expense ratio, as it says, is 0.25%. It also gives you information on when that fund was actually started, and in this case it was started in 2017, so it's pretty young. It's 3 years now since 2020. And as you look down, you will see there under market data, you'll see the price per unit for buying into that ETF. So price per unit for this ETF is 49 Rand 95 cents. So just by looking at the few pieces of information we've looked at so far, you've seen the investment objective of this ETF as well as how much a unit costs in that ETF, the total expense ratio, as well as when it was actually started. So this gives you a lot of information about the ETF already before you actually get into what companies that ETF is invested in, as well as its historical performance data. You already have so much information. Moving on, you'll see that it lists the top 10 companies that it is invested in. So this is what most ETFs will do, is that they'll list the top 10 companies contained within that investment. As you can see here, this one is mostly invested in Microsoft, Apple, Amazon. These are really familiar names, but the really nice thing that it does, it gives you the information in terms of how much of that ETF is actually invested in that. This ETF only has 5% in Microsoft, and then it only has 4.94% in Apple. So it gives you that nice breakdown so you can see the different companies that ETF is invested in. So that list does not contain every single company that ETF is invested in. This ETF is invested in 500 companies, so definitely those 10 companies that have been listed here are not each and every single company. So that's another thing to keep in mind. So moving on to the section that everyone's eyes seem to scroll to when they look at fund fact sheets, the performance section. So this is where you find information about how that particular fund has performed over time. So it gives you how that fund is performed in a year, how that fund is performed in 2 years, 5 years, depending on how long that fund has been in existence. It can stretch and even reach 10, 15 years. So it gives you all that data, which is really useful in terms of actually helping you make a decision. But the one thing you should remember when you look at the historical performance of any investment is that past performance is not a guarantee for future performance. So if an investment might have done 15% year on year, that does not mean it's going to do 15% this year or the following years. So that's one thing to always keep in mind, is that no matter how well an investment has been performing, it is not a guarantee of how it's going to be performing going forward. With this one, it gives you the 1 year return, and then on the 3 and 5 year return, it doesn't give you information, because remember, from the beginning of the fund fact sheet, you can see that the fund was only started in 2017, so they do not have data for 5 years, going back 5 years or 3 years. Another important section to look at is the sectors that an investment is invested in. The Citrix S&P 500, it's invested mostly in information technology, it has consumer staples, it also has industrials, and a little bit of cash. So it gives you that nice breakdown, it gives you percentages in terms of how much exposure you have in those different sectors, which is really nice, especially when you're trying to make sure that investment actually fits into your holistic financial goals or your financial plans. The last thing I'm going to mention, but a very, very important thing to look at, is the risk profile section of your fund fact sheet. So for the one that we're looking at, you can see it says it needs an aggressive risk profile. So you want to make sure that matches your own risk appetite. You don't want to get into an aggressive risk fund when you have a really low risk appetite. If it is an aggressive risk profile, it means it has a lot of volatility. So you want to be able to make sure that you're able to ride those storms. And if you're not able to ride those storms, make sure you get investments that are actually aligned with your own personal risk appetite. So those are some of the things I think you should be looking at when you look at a fund fact sheet, so that you make an informed decision that you're comfortable and confident about. But that's it from me today. Until next week, it's bye for now.